This is part 2 of the true Messiah. Who is he? And in this part 2 we're going to be answering the question, what does John mean when he writes, "In the beginning"? What does that expression mean? Let's see if we can find out. Let's take a little trip here and take a look at what it says here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim, and the same was. Look, see? In the beginning. And it's used again here. In the beginning. What could that possibly mean, do you think? Well, let's see if we can't find out a little bit more. Here's another version of it in a new translation that I just received. And here we have again, in the beginning was the Word, etc., and he was in the beginning. Now notice, interestingly, both places here has the word "the" in italics. That means something has been added there by the translators. It is not in the text. So let's take another look here, and let's look at what it looks like actually in the Greek text, where it says right here, in the beginning, and here, in the beginning in verse 2. If you'll notice in brackets here the word "the," that's where the translator is showing that the word is not in the text, because here is the text and it is en arche, in beginning. There is no "the" here, nothing, zilch, zero. Now if you want to know in Greek what one or two of the words look like that represent "the," here's one. See? The, ha, and the word ha, and proston. There it says "the" here, but they leave it out. And Elohim was the Word. And again you go here, there is no word "the" here, so this doesn't belong there. Proston, there's "the" again, theon. Now let's look at it a little bit further. Whoops, excuse me. We'll go to the next one here, and let's take a better look at that. And we'll see here, this is the Hebrew text of what we call Genesis today. In the Hebrew, this is the title here, Bereshith, which is, in essence, the very first word here. Now, the interesting thing in those days, these were scrolls. There was no book, so this title was not on the outside of the book or at the head of the chapter. It was here, Bereshith, and it means in beginning. And let's take a look at it further. And if we go here and look at it in an interlinear, we can see exactly what it looks like. Again, notice something familiar here from John's Greek transliteration, or interlinear. In the beginning. Notice anything about that that's similar? Well, of course. Just as in John, here in Genesis or Bereshith, "the" has been added and should not be in the text, and here is the word Bereshith. It means in, and Reshith means beginning or at the top, at the first, etc. So now let's look at it in another version of an interlinear that would be something most people would be more likely to see if they're looking for an interlinear. The interlinear, as you can see, is Hebrew, and below that the translation of the English. Now notice the English runs left or right to left here, whereas over here we have it right to left. So let's start with this. Genesis is the Greek title of the book. Genesis actually is not correct. Bereshith is, and another word should be found for Genesis, because in the Greek it doesn't mean exactly what Bereshith means. But here is the very first word in the very first book of the law, what's called the law, the first 5 books of the Bible. And the English translation, as you can see below, is "in the beginning." And here the is in there, but as we know now it shouldn't be. It's in beginning created Elohim. Now over here the English translation running left to right is in the beginning. And remember, this shouldn't be there. And the text in English we read this way, but the text in Hebrew we read in this direction. And then we go back and start in the second line and go in the same direction. So as you can see, Bereshith in beginning. Bereshith in beginning. This, my friends, in actual fact is the title of the first book in the Bible and in the law, the supreme law for the Supreme Court of Israel, called the Sanhedrin. Now if we go on and look at a couple other things here, here is a copy of a page out of the Bullinger translation or work. It's the King James Bible, but with Bullinger's notes in it. As you can see, it begins in the beginning. Up here we have Genesis, right? Genesis, with the little mark on the side of it that tells us, look over in the margin, and sure enough in the margin is Genesis. It says it is no part of the Hebrew title. See that word, Hebrew title, which is simply, what is the Hebrew title? Well, simply Bereshith. Or in other words, in the beginning, and notice again, even Bullinger has this here, the, which doesn't belong there, and it should be in beginning Elohim created, etc. Now let's take a look a little bit further at something else that's interesting, I think you will find, and that is this. Here's a copy of the first verse from the Septuagint version, and I probably should have made this larger, but as you can see here it says NRK, in beginning, and thus in beginning, NRK happens to be the very same expression used here in John, where it says in RK, in beginning was the Word, etc. So what is John talking about here? John is not saying sometime in the way distant time of the past that the Word was there in the beginning of some distant time past. He's saying in the book that we call Bereshith, or what we would call today, from lack of correct usage, the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, John is saying, not some time period, he is saying in the book of Genesis was the Word. And now that leads us to the next part of the equation, and that is, what Word? What is the Word that John is talking about that was in the book of Genesis that proves to the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of Israel, who the true Messiah really was in their day and is even today? And notice again, here is Ein RK repeated in the second verse. Again, so he was in Genesis is what this is saying. He was in the book of Genesis. He was in the book Bereshith, or the scroll, towards Elohim, towards, in actual fact, towards Yahweh. Or we could possibly properly say beside Elohim, the Elohim, or Yahweh. But notice that NRK, in Genesis. Remember that, in Genesis. It is not talking about some distant time frame that we can't know about. He is just quoting out of the law, my friends. He is proving to his readers, primarily meant for the Sanhedrin, that the law of Israel has the Word in it, and that the Word is the Messiah. And we're going to be seeing that in the next part 3 and part 4, etc. In the next one we're going to examine the equation here, halogos. What is the Word that is being talked about by John that is in the book of Genesis, not in some distant time frame that people can build false doctrines on. All right, this is Bob Petrie. We'll see you in part 3. Thank you very much.